Welcome back. Welcome in. It is Country Roads Confidential at earsports.com. This is the Paramount Podcast. I am Mike Casazza, joined by Chris Anderson. Chris, today, Monday, July 29, Wednesday, 31st. If I do the math in my head, that is the legal time to start football practice for West Virginia. And wouldn't you know it, Mountaineers will be on the field. Neil Brown press conference. Before you know it, July will be over. August will be almost over. We'll have Penn State at West Virginia. Big noon out near field. Last day of August, first day of the regular season for both of those teams. Plenty of time to talk about that game. Just a little bit of time to talk about camp. So we're going to do that today. Kind of unpack some ideas that have been on our head, on our message boards. People are debating hotly some topics. I feel like allegiances are being made and enemies are being made by your opinions of certain positions or certain players at the starting line here. Never mind how it looks at the end of camp, but like everybody has their like cast in stone ideas about too deep and what the strengths are, what the weaknesses are. I don't know. What are we doing the next month if everything's already finished? This is kind of pointless. Just let them go play against Penn State. But no, they're going to practice a bunch. We're going to see people move up and down the depth chart. So that's why we're here today. Let me ask you this, Chris. There's a lot of just like general stuff I think we can all agree on. Healthiest the roster's been, biggest the roster's been for sure. Probably the most competent the offense has been. Defense, best position, probably since that 2020 season when you look at the personnel and the continuity and having an idea what they want to do. It's like their second season and that true 3-4 idea they have in their head. Um, a lot of good stuff. What's bad? I feel like we've all been like rose petals everywhere they walk this entire offseason, which is fine. It's been largely earned, but are there dark spots? Are there things in the corner that no one's talking about?
Well, you just getting it started off right, huh, Mike?
Rip the
That's
Band-Aid
what you want
off.
to do. You're taking me back to, I don't remember what it was, but you and I were talking about something, and I wrote a story, and I said, you know, are the answers quite as clear at receiver and defensive back or linebacker? Really, I think was the big one that kind of infuriated a lot of people because I pointed out, hey, the four guys that are in contention here are players that were played 4 games and suffered a catastrophic knee injury, missed the entire rest of the year. Hopefully he's back. Another guy who had never seen a snap, catastrophic knee injury. Hopefully he's back. Another guy who wasn't going to start came in after the other injuries and was the lowest graded player on PFF, and that's Ben Cutter. The other two, obviously, Lathan and Schroeder. You bring in Reed Carrico from Ohio State, who hasn't played a defensive snap in 2 years. I'm concerned about linebacker. Like, there is a world, there is a timeline, if you will, where everything's great. That position is solid. And then if you're a WVU fan, you're ecstatic because those guys are young. And you're like, hey, this could be it for the next couple of years. This position is set for a couple of years. But I think the potential for that timeline seems to be blinding people of the other timeline, where it's like, oh no, these
Yeah.
two guys who suffered big time injuries are a step slower. They're all pretty inexperienced. They're all getting out of place. And that second line of defense is in a tough spot because there is no one else back there. There are no other options at linebacker right now, unless you start diving into true freshmen, which again is going to lead to a lot of the same issues that we're talking about here. So I think linebacker is one, again, there's a potential for something great
Yeah.
and something solid for the next couple of years. But I think a lot of people are just kind of thinking there's no other option than that, and there really is a bad one.
Yeah, I think this is kind of what happens when you have so many players that you identify for a season and they come back. You just assume that everything is good for next year. And sometimes that's true. And like sometimes the best thing about freshmen is that they'll be sophomores. Sometimes the worst thing about freshmen is that they'll be sophomores too, because it just takes time in this game. And is that enough for everybody to get where they want to be? And then also you throw in, the injury component for those players and linebacker. You look at, I don't want to go down the roster here, but like a lot of things that people feel very good about. Let's just say cornerback, it feels better. You just it's more than just signing a player and assuming that he's going to produce at the projected level. You actually have to see it happen. I'm not telling anybody anything I don't know there. This is not football 101. I'm not splitting the atom here. you still have to have it happen, and you still have to see these people go out and do it, which is exactly what August is for here too. And they'll certainly heat things up and make things difficult for, let's just say, the linebackers. And how do you get the linebackers better? Well, you send them crashing into an offensive line that needs its reps, but also contesting a running game that's going to get a lot of action in camp. I'm sure that's going to be the emphasis of their offense, chasing Garrett Green, trying to tackle Jaheim White, trying to knock CJ Donaldson off his feet. That's the only way your Carricos, Cutters, Lathans, Trotters are going to get better. And then even if you go deeper, a Ricky Williams, Curtis Jones, guys like that, will they get earlier opportunities because maybe you know just a little bit about guys in front of them, and then how much will they develop? I don't want to get too far down that because that's one of the things we want to talk about. But I think you can look across the roster and find situations where you feel really good about something, but you still have to see it, which I wrote about this. This would have been yesterday in my three things piece, where just like are we sure? And there's a whole lot of are we sure across the roster where you may really like their talent at receiver, but we sure that Hudson Clement's got that sophomore season in him, that jump? Are we sure that Jaden Bray is going to transition from Oklahoma State to West Virginia in the offense? Are we sure about any number of players? And you can go by position. Like the defensive line looks very formidable when you see Edward Vesteranen, Fatorma Moba, Sean Martin. Are we sure that they got like a second line like they did last year? They have players, they had the names, but like, are we sure about that? And we're not. You can lean one way, but you're not sure until you get to the end, maybe the middle, when they really start to break things off. They go about 2-3 weeks, and all of a sudden they'll start to, I guess, break down camp and start to really assemble their Penn State two deep. So that's what's kind of most fun about these next 10, 14 days, is trying to figure out, yeah, we are sure about this, or man, we're not sure about this. So that's the exciting part. You kind of lift the lid and you figure out where we go.
Well,
Before
hey, well, hold on. Before we get on that thing, that got me thinking. Maybe I'll throw in an extra question here or a bullet point here. How many positions are we sure about?
All right, but like
Let's,
groups or like of the 11 on the
yeah,
field.
let's say groups. Or let's say two deep. Let's say two deep. That way, you got your starter, and if that starter gets hurt, you at least feel okay about the backup option. Quarterback?
No,
No.
it's just a different offense with Mark. He's not Garrett Green. I
Okay.
mean, very confident, can run the offense, but Green's dynamic. I would not feel that the offense gets to its potential as smoothly, as consistently as it would with Green. And that's not necessarily to denigrate Nico Marchio. That's more of a way to elevate Garrett Green. I think he thinks that much. I think he means that much to the offense, where if he's out, I would feel a lot different about the potential for the offense.
Okay. Instead of me going down each position, is there any other position other than running back where you feel great or good about top two, like first and second string? And we'll
Fun-
say, I know Jaheim White, CJ Donaldson, and they both be on the field, all that stuff. Let's just call them one and two. So any other position where you're like, hey, things are great.
Functionally, feel pretty good about what they want to do at tight end.
Okay.
I think they would behave differently if Cole Taylor caught the flu and couldn't play, if they had to have someone else play on, that main spot. I'm not sure Traylon Davis could do that, but they still can do things to work around that. I like collectively what they have at receiver. It doesn't mean that like I just think they're only gonna need like six. So do they have nine right now or whatever? Maybe. Are they gonna play nine? No. And then I mean, there's so many. What do we know about the defensive line? I like their front line there. I think they'll find backups. It may surprise some people, like, oh my gosh, Nate Gabriel's gonna play nose. He'll be third string maybe, but like that'll be interesting. And who's your backup and a tackle? That'll be fun stuff to watch. Like it's a big camp for Sonny Redwood to really step into that spot that he's been there and had like just sputtering starts because injury is not his fault. Can he really take off? But I don't know that yet. And then even a guy like Aubrey Burks, I feel good about him at Spear and also Cat, but who's behind him? That's going to be tricky too. So there are reasons to say yes about the front line on a lot of spots on defense, offensive line too. But like if you're talking about the two deep and the two spots, I mean, who's the best backup on the team? Is it Nico? Is it Jaheim White? If he's even a backup, like you got to get that second line to be in a position where you don't feel much of a drop off. And there are spots like I think Hammond Russell can probably be an okay nose, but I think Fatorma Mobile is further along than him. Vestarin and Redwood, that's interesting. If Redwood could really pick up what people think he's going to be. There's not a whole lot of spots like that. Now, our starting lineup, I feel pretty good about. But if you get in a position where you have the attrition of a regular season, no, I mean you can't feel great about a ton of spots, but that's not unusual either. You really want to see people prove it and earn it this time of year. Boy, this sounds negative, doesn't it?
Hey, at least maybe everybody will come after you. Although I brought up the linebacker thing again, so maybe both of us will be getting it here. Maybe we should just move to the questions and the bullet points we had. Let's stick to the plan before we get into too much trouble.
All right.
Although, God, I'm looking at it. Number two right there, linebacker hot takes. Yeah,
Yeah,
what
cross it
did
off.
we do that for?
So off the field, you have all these rule changes now too, where the scholarship, the caps are changing. I suppose that's gonna be difficult to anticipate how it's going to work until it's actually they had their hands on it and they're maneuvering. Also, we didn't even know what number the West Virginia's going to have. They're going to go from 85 to 105. I have a hard time believing that. But also, Chris, like the other monkey wrench in this too is the June signing date. Like, what if they throw that June signing date in this June? Like I'm not even sure it's going to happen. There's not a whole lot of like stunning momentum for it where you absolutely know it's going to happen too. But that could really change things too for how people get from 85 to 105. And I think we can let's start in the back end of this. I think we understand the the House NCAA ruling, and we don't know what West Virginia is going to do yet. But you've talked and written and spoken to a lot of people about the June signing day. Where does this stand now?
I think it's DOA, dead on arrival. I don't think there's a lot of support. I think there's support from the conversations I had. I think there's support for the idea of it, but everybody understands it's just not feasible. Which is kind of wild to say that, because the very first thing that was said to me during those discussions was, it's just going to cause more problems. And it was because the belief was that, yeah, these kids, the idea was, hey, you get them to sign their letter of intent in June. You don't have to worry about anything the rest of the year. But everyone knows that's not going to be the case because they know the coaches, they being the coaches and schools around the country, you get a kid to sign a letter of intent in June. By the time October rolls around, 30% of those kids are going to be still trying to, look around, look at other schools. Then all of a sudden, you're in court. He's going to request a release from his letter of intent. You're going to have to go to court. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to do that. Everyone knows that, as wild as this is to say, even though it's a contract, it doesn't mean much. And I think that's where the schools and the coaches are like, hey, we have to come up with something a little more concrete. I don't know how you get more concrete than a written contract signed by both parties, but I think because of that, I'm not sure this is ever going to happen because the coach, it's just more of a headache than it would be. Again, they like the idea. It's just how are they going to implement the plan?
Hmm. Do they do they need an extra date? Like, do you think that are they just doing June because June, December, February? Do they need that third window? Is the business, is the industry, are the coaches clamoring for that, or is it just another date they have to mind where they have so many other appointments in their book right now, so to speak, that this just seems like it'd be another one. And listening to you talk about it, well, it sounds like a hassle too.
Yeah. Well, I think the hope was, at least I'm speaking as if I were a coach, is that you get those kids signed and done, and then you don't have to worry about it. The problem is you're putting in all of this work to get these players and these recruits to verbally commit, which is a non-binding agreement, in June during these official visit windows now. And then you get to the fall and you're still doing all this work to keep them. And the coach is like, hey, I'm still doing the work on these recruits
Yeah.
and having to recruit other people and having to recruit my own players and coach a football team. Like this is too much going on at one time. It would be nice if we could take something off the plate. And I think that was the hope between these signing days of getting one in June. I don't think there needs to be three. Ideally, if they could find a way to make these letters of intent more concrete than they currently are, get a June and December, call it a day, be done with it. Like, I hate to say it, but the days of the February signing day, get them out of here. Let it go and go with June and February or June and December and go that route.
How would you account though for the annual coaching turnover where a kid does not sign in December, and all of a sudden 25 FBS jobs change, and then you have players commit, decommit, and there's going to be coaches, there's going to be schools that need players to sign. Some people, I mean, that used to be a thing, used to hold out for February I mean, not even like before the December period, but even when the December period came in, you had some people not quite like college basketball, but you had some people who kind of held out. But there has to be some mechanism for after the coaching carousel to accommodate players, or do we just say transfer portal because it doesn't matter how many times you're in there now, you're just going to transfer.
Well, I think you could definitely put a clause in there that if there's a coaching change, you can get out, like a head coaching change. And I get
Mm.
that a lot of those kids build their relationships with position coaches, so the head coaching change isn't quite as important. But the other part of this is, why does there need to be a 3-day window? Right now it's, hey, it's Wednesday, that third Wednesday in December, and then you have to sign by Friday. Why? Why not just make the window 6 weeks or whatever, let it go into January. That way you can kind of wait out the coaching changes, wait out the bowl games, all of that stuff, wait out the transfers. Um, because 99% of those kids, if you told them, hey, you can sign from December 15th through January 30th, 99% of those kids are going to sign on December 15th, just as they always have. So why make it a 3-day window? Just let it be a 6-week window, or let it be 3 days, take a couple weeks off for, the holidays and Christmas, everything, New Year's, and then start it back up for the month of January. Just kind of let it be a longer window. And then those kids who were like, hey, I want to hold out to figure out this coaching situation, that's fine.
Very quickly, I don't want anybody's eyes to roll back in their head, but you were there Thursday. Everybody understood that the House ruling was the settlement was going to come out Friday. It came out Friday afternoon. You're around the camp, the coaches. No identities, Chris, but what's the vibe on 85 to 105? I'm sure they've been thinking about this. They probably don't know the number they have, but like, how does this resonate with them right now?
Well, one of the first things mentioned to me was something you put on the board too. I don't know if we talked to the same people, but hey, it doesn't have to be 105. The
Mhm.
scholarship number can be 92. It's just has to be less than 105. Heck, it doesn't even have to be 85. But of course, they want as many as possible, as many as they can afford. And at a school like WVU with their budget, they can go over 85. Not a problem. But I'm like you. I think the number's probably going to fall most years between the 90 and 95 range because, quite frankly, like once you start getting to 105, those kids are just going to leave. Like if you're scholarshiping a fifth string, you know, left guard, he's gone. He's going to go find another school to play at. That's just how it's going to work. So I'm with you. I think that's going to be 90-95. But as far as the vibe, a lot of the discussion centered around, and I wrote that story of in-state recruiting and how it's kind of going to be tricky because the names are mentioned to me. Hey, Preston Fox. Hey, Hudson Clement. These guys that are making a difference on this team. If they were, if you just rank the kids that were on the team returning, you're recruiting 1 to 105, most likely they're probably, would have been at the time that they were being recruited, like 95. So they're probably in. But what if they were 106? Then they're just out. They never come to WVU. There's no spot for them. And so I think that's going to be interesting. But then also those guys that are fringe, the other part was brought up was those fringe guys in state. A lot of talk of in state. There wasn't a lot of talk of how it's going to change out of state recruiting or transfer recruiting. But hey, those fringe in state guys that you're like, man, I hope we can get this kid here on a preferred walk on. He might be a scholarship kid, but I hope we can get him preferred walk on. Now you just offer him scholarship and you're done. He's on the team. So I think ultimately this is going to end up benefiting West Virginia high school kids as much as it is anybody.
Yeah, senior tape too. Like a lot of schools don't look at senior tape because they're done at that point. But if someone's a sleeper, moves to a new school, has an injury, and all of a sudden he's got a great senior year, there are players like that. They're not like teal chip guys, but I mean, you're going to find people who are good. And that's something that back in the day, West Virginia used to spend some time looking at was senior tape. Can they find people who had a good year that you didn't know about? I believe Dustin Garrison was one of those guys too. Even though he had a prolific career, he was so good as a senior that they kind of said, this guy might be, worth a flyer. Let's see what we can do. And lo and behold, he ends up coming here and having some good games, good seasons, a little bit of injury, bad luck there too. So yeah, there's a lot to be said or written here, and I think you're right. The number that 105 doesn't really matter so much because like conceptually they probably know they're below it, and then how they figure out how to get there be a work in progress too. Moving along here, Chris. We did some linebacker stuff. We don't have to get into the spiciest stuff. However, anything you didn't get off your chest there, you think you need to because like I'm looking at the names here. It's Trotter, Cutter, Lathan, Carrico, Biser, Favoris. We'll see about Jaito. Will he make it? Will he be there? we understand his injury history in college and didn't see him in the spring. Then you got Williams and Jones in the freshman class. A guy like Tyler Kane is still around, a transfer that certainly physically has the tools to do it. Can he play? We'll see. But anybody, anything coming out of left field, you think here? Because just five is not enough. Six might not even be enough, but five is not enough either.
Yeah, I think more so the more so than the linebacker specific position is how much will those limited numbers kind of affect their scheme and their packages and such? Because we've seen over the past year or two a lot of talk from the coaches of, hey, packages, packages, packages. This guy, maybe he's not a starter, but he's a starter in this package or first teamer in this package, if you will. And we saw at times, not quite as much last year, maybe a little bit, but definitely in years prior, of this coaching staff was not afraid to kind of go almost with like a 5-1-5. You remember that? Like
Yeah. Iowa
it's
State.
it's it's whatever the personnel is. And I'm curious if because these guys are so young, because they don't quite have the numbers, again, they listed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players on the depth chart there for the two spots. And then you mentioned that might not even be enough. Um, could you see something crazy? Could you see three defensive linemen, two bandits, Bradley and French on each side, one linebacker, and then, a spear, couple safeties, couple corners? I wouldn't rule it out, but again, I've already given my linebacker hot takes. The only thing I wanted to add on to that was, do they kind of go into sub packages that might not need two linebackers out there?
Yeah, I don't think it has to be too exotic either. I think you can get into like 3rd and 8 and put Bradley and French in the corners and let's let them come around the end. Like we saw that last year with Bradley and Bartley, and it wasn't bad. And when they see bigger packages from the offensive formation, like 12 personnel, for example, they're not going to play Aubrey Burks at spear, and they're not going to play Zay Jennings at spear if Burks can't do it. So they'll have a bigger linebacker out there. So like when they play an Iowa State, for example, and has the big tight ends, you're probably going to see a 3-4 with an extra linebacker, a bigger linebacker. And how are we getting there from the numbers we just mentioned? I don't know, but maybe Bradley plays that strong side linebacker. Maybe he plays like an outside like edge kind of like linebacker there because he has the body and the physicality to do it. And that wouldn't be like completely reinventing the wheel. And that wouldn't be putting some weird package in and trying to survive the whole game. I think they can actually do that within the nuts and bolts of their defense and be okay there too. But they're going to have to hang on with probably those guys. The good thing is that Mike and Will are pretty similar. So if you start Lathan and Trotter, and Trotter needs to come out for a little bit, could you just move Lathan over and then put Carrico at Mike? Maybe something like that. And they're going to have to work on just kind of fostering that depth there in camp and see what happens there too. Less is more on linebackers, Chris. Let's keep the sun shining on the receiver position here. Um, Not great numbers, and when you look statistically, like nobody here goes, "Oh my gosh, sure thing, first team all conference." That's not the way they do it, though. We understand that, and then apart from the names being there that we recognize, I think everybody kind of anticipates some growth from a Traylon Ray, who, by the way, speaking of growth, shrunk 2 inches. Did I get
Yeah,
this
I was gonna
right?
say good timing on that one, Mike.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So some progression from Ray, Gallagher, Hudson Clement. You get some veteran additions with Mississippi State's Justin. Oh boy, is it Rogers or Robinson? Robinson, Jaden Bray. You have some guys who are older there too, who are just trying to find a way. Inside guys, outside guys. I think they're going to be all over the map here. Outlook on this, apart from just kind of stay tuned and see how it goes. I have a feeling it's going to throw a bunch of stuff up in the air, and then as it falls and they figure out what lands in the right spot again and again and again, they'll kind of go from there. But I think it's be a lot of experimentation early on. Even though they did that in the spring, they think they have an idea. I think it continues until they're 200% sure on stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the hottest take in the world, but on linebacker, I was like, hey, be careful about the darkest timeline, if you will. At wide receiver, I have a hard time picturing this going poorly. Like I could picture it being okay, and I could picture it being anywhere from okay to great, but I have a hard time seeing where it's just going to go completely off the rails at that position because I do think you have a couple guys who have been solid. in Clement and Fox. They've proven they can be at least somewhat reliable, at least somewhat, capable of making a big play. Same with Traylon Ray, Young. Um, Again, I think people, in your minds, you're in your memories, especially with his last game being that bowl game where he caught the 75-yarder on the very first play. You're like, oh yeah, remember how great Traylon Ray was? And it's like, yeah, a couple hundred yards for the season. Like, but I think the potential is there. You've seen it, all three of those guys, and then really feeling good about Jaden Bray. Some of the comments one of your famous things is who's talked about, who's asked about, and he's talked about, by the coaching staff. He was somebody that the coaches brought up in the spring, and I think he is somebody, and I think it was Bilal Marshall who said, he's just built different. He just looks different, acts different, plays different than the guys they had, which is a good sign. And then kind of cross your fingers on the Robinson thing. I mean, he's used to be a big time, one of the most sought after recruits in the country, all the physical tools, has all the potential in the world. You just kind of hope you can get 70% of whatever that potential is. And 70% of whatever that potential is might be better than anything West Virginia got at receiver last year. So I feel better about receiver than maybe I do at linebacker.
Yeah, I'm just curious how it's going to happen. I can't get by two things. One, they spent the spring saying, love the receivers, got a great group. And again, I don't disagree with that. I think there's a way to get a very productive group here. And I'm not sure you solved that during the spring. I'm not sure how you could or why you think you would. But something happened where they got done with the spring. They immediately went out and got an X or a Z, whatever you want to call Robinson. He's an outside guy. And I don't mean this as a negative, but like they got Robinson. It wasn't some no doubt all conference player that you can't say no to. A nice career. Probably hasn't gone as high or as far as he wanted to, and that's why he's in the portal looking for a better finish for him. And I just wonder if that would meet the expectation of a player who arrives in a situation like that, where an offense has got a great quarterback, got some playmakers, love the receivers. We're going to go out and go add one, even though, as we know, Chris, the number crunch was real for a while. They nevertheless go out and get him, and that's not a person that just makes you go, now it all makes sense. That one took some time to figure out. So we'll see how it goes. And then, Chris, how do they fit Rick Darius Farmer in? I'm not calling him Day Day. I like Rick Darius much more. How do they fit Rick Darius Farmer in? He's a slot, so is Gallagher. Gallagher never really got untethered this season. Is Farmer that much more threatening? Did like to have that part of the offense consistently rolling in and being fresh, so they have Gallagher and then Farmer, or is that just something you say about a guy before he hits campus? He has some gifts that they're going to try to incorporate in the offense. I wonder how and at whose expense or at the expense of what other part of the offense. But yeah, we spent this time talking about returning players, the newcomers here, in addition to Bray, that I have not yet seen yet and don't know a whole lot about. I wonder how that's going to work. That has my attention as we start here.
Yeah, with the Farmer thing, it's you look at it, he's second on the depth chart. Well, would you say that's more like fourth? Because again, how often are there going to be three receivers out there? How often is there going to be a slot? Or how often is that slot going to be replaced by a tight end? Or how often are they just going to call it slot, but it's actually Cole Taylor as a bigger receiver, kind of lining up in a slot style in the offense? So I think in a lot of packages, you'll see Gallagher, but in other packages, you'll see Cole Taylor as the third receiver. And maybe, I mean, not quite as often with Traylon Davis, but again, more so just the tight end position being that second slot rather than Farmer. But I think he is so talented that you're like, hey, you're just boom, you're there, second string, good to go.
So I'm on a camp. I thought, wow, this guy's good. And then I found out that everybody in the country wanted him, and I was like, oh, okay. Well, I got that recruiting guy card, so I can spot the obvious ones here. Wrapping up here, Chris. Um, what's one thing you actually want to learn? Broad question, I understand, but you could actually use the however many days we're allowed in there to actually take something away that either you want to know more about or you don't yet know. One thing you can actually learn from fall camp here.
So I'm trying to look right here because as we're speaking, I just received the schedule for what will be open to media for practice. Um, and you got the early stuff, of course. It's 4 weeks long. More the open stuff for the media actually getting to view practice will be early. love to get to know more about the receivers. I know we are just talking about them, but how much hitting is going to be done in fall camp? How much hitting is going to be done in preseason practice? Because then again, linebackers, I have lots of questions. Second string of defense of the defensive line, just like you mentioned, questions. But how much are we going to see of those guys? The secondary, who's going to stand out? Who's going to be starting? It's going to be hard to tell during these fall camps and preseason practices. But receiver, you can see who kind of has it even without the contact. You know, you can see who's getting separation, who's making catches, um, and you know who's shifty, who's not, who's speedy, who's not. So I think that's something that I can realistically see with my own two eyes during fall camp and would like to get some answers to.
All right, mine is I want to know we can agree at safety they're going to play musical chairs, right?
Yeah.
What's the soundtrack? Is it like Stairway to Heaven or like Happy Birthday? Those are two very different songs as far as length, right? How long are they going to go with this? Because they did a lot of this in the spring. Um, and they know they have a plan for who goes where, but are we positive? Are we sure about Cat and Free? And what if it's not good at all? Like, are they committed to Burks kind of doing a hybrid thing? And then in addition, do you have enough veterans back there that you can get by and you don't have to play a long song? You can get by with a short song and you don't have to worry about like a Jason Cross, for example. If he comes on later in the season, fine. But you know what? We got enough guys. We don't need him necessarily playing big snaps against Penn State? Or do you not know enough that you got to play that long song and you got to let everybody run around for a while because you need to see what some of your freshmen can do. You need to see what some, could trying to think of somebody here. Um, like Kakora Tarnway. How are we saying his name, Chris?
I, hey, I said it Tarnue, so we'll see.
That's it then.
They haven't
Is it
updated the roster with the audible thing on it yet, so
okay?
that's
Yeah,
next.
but like, what if he ends up being a corner? Like he's safety right now, and think he could play both spots. But what if he's better at corner? Well, then how does that change things? That's the one thing I'm curious about is how much rope, how much music do they give the games they're going to play in the back end because they have players. It's going to take some time to put it together, but they've been doing this for a while. But they also have some new players, whether it is transfers like Tarnui or if it is freshmen like Cross. I'm sure there's others too, but those are the names I've been caught up on for a while. I think they're talented and they have a spot. I just don't know how much time you can or want to give them because playing a top 10 team at home, they really don't want to lose that game. They certainly don't want to get beat over the head over the top of the secondary again. Keep an eye on that one. How long is the song that they play for musical chairs? We'll see. What do you think of the schedule? I haven't seen it yet.
Not standard. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
nothing. Couple open practices early. Um, coach. Let's see, player Coach Brown players. Friday's closed. Fan day Saturday, of course. Sunday closed. But then interviews, no, yeah, but two or
Okay.
three. But yeah, I mean, because as we mentioned before, sometimes they send it out. And there's only one or two open practices listed, and then down the road say, "Hey, practice is open tomorrow." You end up showing up. So we'll see.
All right. Sounds good. Plenty coming up. Previews today, tomorrow, maybe even Wednesday too. Neil Brown. Sounds like just Neil Brown on Wednesday. Again, if they did nothing on that day, I'd be okay because you're not gonna see and you're gonna share even less from what happens that first practice. I get that, but we will have you covered along the way. Wednesday, all the way till the first game, August 31st. Be here before you know, like I said. Until then, I'm Mike Casaza.
And I'm Chris Anderson.
We will talk to you then.